Okay. So hopefully everyone can see this. Sorry for the delay. I'm gonna get started now. So I'm Victor Quinn, VP of Engineering here at Social Radar. And so this webcast is gonna be called GPS 101. So it's gonna be a very high level view of GPS, not specifically Android or iOS, but more kind of a broad overview. I will talk a little bit about those later in this, but I'm gonna keep it rather short. It's gonna be 10-15 minutes. I'm gonna go pretty quickly. And then after that, we'll open up for questions in case anyone has any questions. So I'll get started here. So these are kind of the topics I'm going to touch base on, and I'll dig deeper into each one of these. But I'm going to talk about time to first fix, assisted GPS, estimated accuracy, what a location point actually is on Android and iOS. That's the only iOS and Android really specific one. Different environmental factors that can affect GPS quality. And just kind of an illustration of how raw GPS data is alarmingly poor. And then just a brief little blurb about LocationKit. So, time to first fix. So in the GPS world, this is the time to first kind of figure out where the device is in the world. So with old school traditional GPS devices, this can take 30 seconds or more. Basically, the GPS chip on the device needs to start listening, and then it needs to get information from the satellites that are obviously in the sky. And it takes a little while to actually get a lock and understand where those satellites are. And so the time to first fix traditionally would be around 30 seconds. And that's actually what it is still on the GPS chip on the phone itself. But surely we can do a little bit better. So smartphones use something called assisted GPS. So this will actually use local intelligence to help quickly get device location, which would shorten the time to first fix. So instead of 30 seconds, 40 seconds, which wouldn't be acceptable to a user of a cell phone, it uses cell phone towers to triangulate location, uses known Wi-Fi networks to kind of refine that location and so on. And this kind of happens seamlessly in the background by Apple and Google. They don't really tell you how they got the location that they give you, but they will use everything at their disposal to kind of refine that information. And so this gives you very quick time to first fix. We're talking seconds to figure out where you are on the planet, and very, very quickly to get you in the range of where you are. And in parallel, it starts the GPS chip to actually spin up to get a good solid lock. So then roughly 30 seconds later or so, the GPS chip will actually kick on, have a lock on the GPS satellites, and be able to provide you with a higher accuracy location. So this is kind of a little bit of what I just said, but I've got a picture of a map here, and this is Apple Maps. And so when you first launch the app, you'll notice two things. Number one, there's kind of a blue dot in the center, which shows your current location. But then there's a big kind of translucent blue circle. I'm not sure if anyone can see my mouse cursor, but I'm kind of moving over it. And that shows kind of the margin of error. And so that first location that you get as soon as you start up any app that uses GPS is pretty poor because it's just using the cell tower triangulation, so they can get you within a couple hundred meters, but that's about as good as they can get. And you'll notice after about 30 seconds or a minute or so, that circle, that blue circle that's translucent, will shrink significantly. That's basically once your phone achieves a GPS lock, it's able to tell a lot more accurately where the location is. And the other thing you'll notice as well is that in this situation, we're in downtown DC. So the cell tower triangulation, the Wi-Fi networks and all that actually works pretty decently to refine your location. The first generation iPhone actually didn't even have a GPS chip on board. It just used this triangulation, and it was able to do pretty decently with your location. If you get out into rural environments in the country where there's not a lot of Wi-Fi, there aren't many cell towers, you're not going to notice that margin of error is going to be a lot greater. So estimate accuracy. So since the accuracy varies widely, Apple and Google both provide a measure of the accuracy of the points they provide. So again, they're not going to tell you, hey, we got this GPS location this lat long based on cell tower triangulation, and we got this lat long based on the GPS chip and the combination of the two. They're just going to give you a point and give you a measure of that accuracy. So it's a quantity in meters of the margin of error of the location points. So for Google, they're very explicit. They say it's the radius of the confidence of the point being within 1 standard deviation. So there's a 68% chance that the point they've given you is within their range. Apple, it's probably the same, that they're not quite as explicit. But so when you get a point, you can look at it and it'll say 10 meters accuracy, 65 meters accuracy. Some of those crappy points when you first spin up the app will say 2,000 meters accuracy. And that's just basically them saying that they don't really know where you are. They know you're within around 2 kilometers, but that's pretty much it. And then as the GPS gets a lock, you'll start to get more highly accurate points. So the only point during this that I'm going to actually talk about kind of device-specific things is this location point, just so that when I show you the next bit, it kind of makes a little bit more sense. So this is for context. So on both Apple and Google's location managers, when you get a location, you kind of get this bundle of data. It's a packet of data, and it includes, of course, a latitude, longitude, but it will also include altitude. It'll include that accuracy that I showed you. Apple will include both horizontal and vertical accuracy. Horizontal is how accurate the lat long is. Vertical is how accurate the altitude is. They'll also give you bearing or course. On Android, it's bearing, and on iPhone, it's course. But basically, the direction that the device is facing or heading. It'll give you a speed. If it's traveling at some rate of speed, it'll give you that. And it'll give you a time for when that point happened. And then I've got some reference links, which aren't useful for the purpose of this webcast. But afterwards, I'll put this on SlideShare, and then that'll actually link directly to those points in the docs. One thing that's interesting to note is that as you get a highly accurate location point, you'll get all of this bundle of data. You'll get altitude, bearing, course, speed, and so on. But if you get low accuracy points, they won't give you a lot of this stuff. So you'll notice that they won't provide altitude. They won't provide bearing or course. They won't provide speed. They'll actually be, for instance, on iOS particularly, they'll be -1 for a lot of these values if the location is too inaccurate. So if they can only tell where you are within a couple hundred meters, it's very difficult for them to say with any confidence how fast you're actually traveling, because they don't really have enough data. So they just won't provide that for you. So, and there are a bunch of environmental factors that will affect the quality of the GPS and the quality of the location points that you get. So, for instance, these are roughly ranked in highest, most impactful to least impactful, but not strictly speaking in that order. But so buildings, GPS signal indoors is very poor. Buildings, they're made out of concrete and metal and stuff that really blocks the GPS signal, right? You've got these satellites in the sky, they need to beam a signal down, and they get a lot of interference from buildings. So you'll notice if you looked at the raw data that inside the buildings, the accuracy is a lot higher, aka that margin of error is a lot greater than it is once you're outdoors. It can get a lot better. And then buildings actually reflect the GPS signal. So I'm going to show in a little bit some raw GPS data, and you'll see that the buildings will actually reflect it. So they appear to be coming from across the street in a lot of circumstances. So it's tough, especially in urban environments, to get a good GPS lock. So weather. So on cloudy, rainy days like today, the GPS signal is going to be noticeably worse because a lot of the clouds and the stuff, again, you've got these signals coming from the satellites. More stuff in the way means crappier signal. So when you have a lot of clouds, a lot of rain, stuff like that, the signal is going to be degraded. Time of day. So the GPS satellites themselves are in kind of a quasi-geosynchronous orbit. So it actually takes 12 hours for a satellite to get around the Earth. So if you'll notice, they kind of travel around roughly twice a day. It actually is a little bit off from that because you're on the planet, which is actually rotating too. So from your frame of reference, it's not going to quite come by exactly 2 times a day, but roughly speaking, that's the case. So and depending on where the satellites are in the sky, your GPS quality or signal will be better or worse. So a perfect situation is not when the satellite's right above you. It's actually when they're two at a decent angle so that you can easily triangulate your location. But you'll notice sometimes, depending on the time of day, sometimes the GPS signal is a little worse because if a satellite is directly above you, it's hard to triangulate where you are. And so you're going to get a little bit lower accuracy. Accuracy of the clock. So the GPS requires sub-millisecond clock accuracy. Actually, slightly, probably sub nanosecond. I should probably update that. The GPS satellites themselves actually have a cesium atomic clock in them, and they they depend on figuring out the time. And actually, the signal that they send from the satellite down to that the devices pick up is actually a timestamp functionally. And so the device can figure out from the different satellites what their very, very accurate timestamps were, and from that can figure out by a triangulation how far they are from the satellites and where the device is. The device itself, so we actually notice differences in accuracy from one device to another. So I'm not talking about iPhone versus Android or anything like that, but we have 10 identical iPhone 6s, all with the same carrier. They're all T-Mobile. And we notice that some of them are very good GPS and some of them are really crappy GPS. So it could be manufacturing inconsistencies or the antenna. We're not entirely sure, but you'll notice these a variance in the accuracy from device to device. So whether or not the device is in motion, if it's still, it can certainly get a better lock than when you're moving at a high rate of speed. It's harder to get an accurate location. And then last, the atmosphere. So there's this thing called ionospheric distortion. It sounds totally made up. During certain times of the day, like in the afternoon, it's warmer. And so a good way to think about this is that if you had a river and you had a spear and you wanted to stab a fish through the river, you'll notice that as you stick it into the river, the visual image of the spear will actually bend, right? Because it's actually bending the light. So it looks like the spear is in a different place than it is. And kind of the same thing happens with GPS signal during the day. So. All right, so raw GPS is alarmingly poor. So I'm going to actually show a video. This is actually an internal tool that we have that we built. Let me see here. And okay, so this is an internal tool that we built to look at the actual raw data so that our engineers can refine and make sense of this mess of data. So I'm going to kind of play through a little bit of it and kind of talk about it as we go and kind of give some example of the raw GPS data being very poor. This is from a device where the GPS is, the settings are set for very high. It's set for best accuracy. It's set with a very low distance filter so that we get all of the raw GPS data. And so I'm just going to kind of play through it and show a little bit about it. So first of all, actually, if you notice at the start, our office is actually right here. And you can actually see before I even start it, we've got points kind of all over the place. This is like, I don't have a scale here, but probably 20-meter variance or something like that, right? So what we try to do with LocationKit is take these raw points, this raw data, and through a series of filters and understanding the. You can't see your screen. Oh, you can't? Okay. Sorry, I've just been told that nobody can see my screen. So, let's see, maybe it's because I went full screen and I was sharing a screen. Okay. Oh, now you see me. Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry, technical difficulties here again. Let me see if I can. Okay. So here's the video. So what I was saying before is that you can see this cluster of points right at the start. They're already rather dispersed. And you'll notice that a bunch of them are actually outside of our building. So we're not starting off too great. So I'm going to unpause it here. We're going to watch. So these are the raw GPS points. And I'm just going to pause it right there. So actually what this is, you see this raw GPS data that's kind of all over the place. We actually had somebody who came out of our office, took a right, walked straight up 19th Street, and then took a right into 7-Eleven. If you notice those GPS points, they're all over the place. It looks like he's been drinking heavily. They're across on the other side of the street. you notice that they kind of jump forward, and then there are gaps where they're very compressed together, and then places where they're very far apart. So it's very, very crappy, to be honest. So we're going to see. Now, this is a fun one. So he actually left 7-Eleven, came up here, crossed the street, and took a left in a McDonald's here. But if you look at the point, it looks like he went all the way over here through these buildings, around in a circle. It's really, really rough. Here's another great example. So this case, actually, he actually came out of the McDonald's, walked down the street here, went into CVS, and he's in CVS for a while. He's walking around the aisles, trying not to get kicked out because he's loitering while he collects data for us. And actually, if you look at the group of points, they're not only are they not in the CVS, they're out in the street, but they're just all over the place. So you see, if you watch them in time sequence, you see that you get one over here, one over here, one over here. So they look like he's bouncing all over the place. That's because he's indoors. So he's getting low quality, low accuracy points. So they tend to bounce around a bit. But I mean, this is just messy, and so on and so forth. So moral of the story, the raw GPS that you get from the phones. Oh, this is my favorite. It looks like he went through the building. You know, he didn't actually go through the building. He just walked straight across the street here, but it's reflecting off the other building and looking like he's over there. Anyway, the raw GPS data that you get from the device is very bad. So what we're working really hard at LocationKit to do is take this crappy data and clean it up and make it useful for developers. So from this, we're actually able to, even this messy data that you see here, we're able to tell that he went to McDonald's and then he went to CVS and so on, using some of our algorithm. But okay. And so that's all I'm going to say about LocationKit. If anyone has questions, of course, I'm happy to answer them. But that's all I really was planning to talk about. And that's pretty much it. So that's kind of GPS 101, from time to first fix, the time to get that first point, which assisted GPS helps a lot with. The way they estimate accuracy and the data that they actually give you on the location point, including that margin of error and that accuracy, the different environmental factors that affect the quality of the GPS, the raw GPS data being, like I said, alarmingly poor, and just quickly about LocationKit. So that's all I've got. Do you have any questions? To answer a question I see on the side here from Ivan, yeah, we're going to share this deck. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. I was trying to make the thing work, but yeah, I'm going to put this on SlideShare after this presentation. So we did have one question from someone who actually couldn't be part of this presentation today. And he asked, what are the significant differences between iOS 7, 8, and 9 that impact the LocationKit development approach, if any? And that's a good question. So first of all, there's been a slight difference in the, first of all, I should say the GPS chips in almost all of these devices have functionally almost never changed. So from device to device, there hasn't yet been a GPS chip that's been significantly better than the last one. So the iPhone 3G was the first iPhone to have a GPS chip. Other phones had it before that. But for the most part, there's not a huge difference to in the GPS chip. So from a hardware perspective, there's almost no difference. From a software perspective, Apple has made 7 to 8. They made was the privileges you have to ask for. So with iOS 7, it was that you just had to ask for location privileges, and iOS 8 they broke it down so you have privileges to use it while the user is using the app, and privileges to use it all the time in the background. And I actually see that Ivan just asked a question about that. So he said the pop-up all our app all our app to also access your location when you are not using the app. This really annoys our users. Yeah, so unfortunately, there's no way around that from at least in iOS and on Android too. When you want to use the GPS, it's going to ask you for permission. That actually has nothing to do with how you're using the GPS chip at all. It's once you enable the background location, at least on iOS. And then for Android, if you access the GPS at all, you're going to have it. So unfortunately, there's no way to delete it. You can change the text of that. So there's actually a key in your info.p list. It's called NS location always usage description. I know that's very long. We've got it in our documentation, but you can set that to whatever you want to tell your users. So the idea is to inform them of how you're using location in your app, and so that they can make an informed decision. Before I move off of that, from iOS 8 to iOS 9, one change they made was that with the location manager is that you need to set a flag called background updates to true if you're going to use the location in the background. But other than that, that was the only change really for LocationKit from iOS 8 to iOS 9. The other thing I will say too is that one of the things we use in LocationKit are all the sensors that we have available on the device. So when we're refining location, we use not only the GPS, but we also use the accelerometer, the gyroscope, the compass, the altimeter, and so on. And so those have changed slightly over time. So the altimeter actually wasn't available on devices, I believe, before the 5S, or it might have been the 6. Anyway, the altimeter is relatively new, so we have to check for it, for its existence before we can utilize it. But other than that, there hasn't been a whole heck of a lot that's changed, thankfully. The one thing that we have toyed with from a change from iOS 7 through 9 is that we can compile it, LocationKit, as either a static library or a dynamic framework. Dynamic framework, you can compile it. It reduces the size, and it will but it's only available on iOS 8 and 9. So if we build it as a dynamic framework, if you have users that have iOS 7, then unfortunately it can't be deployed on their devices because they don't support dynamic frameworks for iOS. And so that's one more thing. So we're looking at ways to actually cross-compile it to have it so that you can get the benefits of the dynamic framework, but also support people with iOS 7. That's one of the things we're looking into right now that we might release. Okay, so I've got another question here. Is it expensive to switch LK setting? And what's the best practice to switch settings? So no, it's not expensive to switch settings. Depending on the setting that you choose, obviously it could be expensive. So if you set it to high, it's going to be certainly more expensive than our auto mode or low. But in terms of switching it, no, it's not particularly expensive just to make that switch. So the follow-up question to that was, what's the best practice to switch settings? So we actually have a lot of developers who will use the setting actually pairs very nicely with our activity mode. So we're tracking the device and we're tracking the mode of activity that it has. So if it's if the person is if the device is sitting still, if the person's walking, if the person's driving, and so most often it's beneficial to pair that setting with the activity mode. So depending on your use case, so we have a couple of apps that really want to track users' locations while they're driving to determine their rate of travel, for instance. And so what they actually do is that when they detect the activity mode that we've detected from the GPS, the accelerometer, and all that stuff, then they can change the setting to high to get more accurate location while the person is driving, but then switch it back to auto or switch it to low or off when they're not moving fast. So let's see. Ivan says, is there any way we can change or delete it? Can you share this for me, how to change the text? So I mentioned this a little bit before. Unfortunately, there's no way to get rid of that pop-up. That's an iOS specific thing. Likewise for Android, when you first install the app, it'll ask you for permission to GPS if you're going to use the GPS at all. So I can share it. We have it in our docs. I'll follow up with you, Ivan, but I'm writing it down here. But if you change the text of the NS location always usage description in your info.p list, again, that's a mouthful, that'll change the text that's displayed to the user. And so one of the things that iOS 8 and 9 both do is that they'll actually display it to the user the first time you use location, and then a couple days later, if you're continuing to use location in the background, it will pop it up again when they're not using your app. and say, hey, this app's using your location. Is this okay? So what we like to inform our developers is that we suggest to think about how you would react if you got that pop-up a couple days later, if you're browsing your mail or looking at your text messages. Think about, put that into your mindset and think about what you would want the pop-up to say that would make sense. So it's a little bit different to think about than when the person's actively using your app, because it's it's a different context. So let's see. So I got another question here. We have a rare occasion where user reporting lat long that is off, like a half hour's drive away. I've checked the geolocation and it is off. Have you seen this, and what would explain this? So as I kind of touched on a little bit early on in the presentation, when the device first starts up, it kind of is a hack, so to speak, in order to get faster time to first fix. Apple uses what's called assisted GPS. So it uses cell tower triangulation and knowledge of the Wi-Fi signals and so on in the vicinity of the device in order to very quickly give a location, but often it's very inaccurate. And it depends where you actually are. So in a city environment where you have a lot of cell towers, you have a lot of Wi-Fi, known Wi-Fi points and so on, often that can even be decently accurate. But if you're out in a rural environment, cell tower triangulation is not going to get you very good results, especially if you're in a kind of a low signal area. So you could potentially, for that first point, before you've got a GPS lock, get a point that could be very, very far away. Could be kilometers away, but it should quickly get a GPS fix after a certain period of time, after a couple seconds, and then be back on. The other thing is that LocationKit, particularly the way it's doing it, it's kind of always running, so it's got kind of location always going, so that, by default at least. So it can actually resolve a lot faster. If you have an app that's running LocationKit and you jump into the app, instead of having to all of a sudden, oh, the user wants location, let's spin up my GPS, let's get all this information, it's already running, so it already has that on demand that it can give directly to your app. So you don't have to necessarily wait that 30 seconds to get a good lock. So I got a question here from Mark Evans, who says, two questions. One, is there support and helpers for geofencing? And two, why is this kit free? Okay, so first, yes. So geofencing is actually included out of the box with LocationKit. So what you can do is tell us that you want to be notified of visits to a particular place, and you can actually specify a radius. So for instance, if you wanted to, and I can, if you look at our docs, it's docs.locationkit.io, and look at venue and event detection, we've got a whole blurb there about it. And if you have any other questions, you can contact us. But by default, what you say is, yes, I want to be notified, for instance, when my users visit a Starbucks. And by default, that will be when they're within 100 meters radius of a Starbucks. So one of the things yes, so that does the geofencing automatically. We don't have kind of the traditional way people used to do geofencing, or a lot of other companies will do it. They require you to upload, or click on a map and put like 10,000 lat longs, or input a lat long for every Starbucks in the country, right? We don't have that, because we think it's a lot easier for our users to be able to leverage our venue database automatically, so that they can just say, notify me when my users are near Starbucks, and we'll let them know. So you can specify any radius for that. So you could specify, half a mile, or 100 meters, or 50 meters, or if you actually specify a radius of 0, we'll tell you actually when they enter a Starbucks, if they've actually gone indoors. And the other question, why is this kit free? So that's actually, I'm an engineer. That's more of a question for our business guys. But basically the short version is that we want to make location available to everyone, and we want to make it, so we started LocationKit when we were building, we started as Social Radar, building a consumer app to give information on people's whereabouts and where they are on you. And we noticed as we were building it that location was kind of a pain in the ass, basically. It was hard to figure out where people were. Again, that raw location data I showed you is kind of all over the map. And it was hard to figure out. It wasn't easy to get information on venues, right? So we were building this thing, and we had to look at all these different sources, get the GPS data, try to clean it up, try to figure it out, and then we'd have to send it off to a service to say, where is this place? And it got very complicated. So we wanted to make it easy for everyone to use. So the lowest tiers, the basic is free, and we want to keep it free forever. So a lot of the stuff that we've got on the client is all free. We have higher tiers that are paid for people that want specific integrations or custom integrations or more specific reporting or have a ton of users. We're talking about millions and millions. But we want to make it easier for small developers to be able to just build some cool stuff and get going. And so we want to make it free. So, any other questions? All right. All right. I guess if there are no more questions, then I'll wrap it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this presentation on SlideShare, and we'll figure out a way to get it probably linked to this Crowdcast thing so that you can download it. And if we have, I think there's a way with Crowdcast to send out an email to all attendees. So I'll do that so that you can have a link to this presentation. And I think this video will be available online as well. So thank you all for coming, and hopefully you learned something about location.